So a warm welcome to each one of you. So Sena talked about the challenges faced in harnessing data across different organizations and enterprises. Let's take a step back and look at the situation that we are in today. Obviously, COVID-19 has upended most of the enterprises and organizations around. While we do not fathom the impact completely, there are some estimates that have been doing rounds. So according to the WTO, the impact on the global merchandise trade alone is anywhere between 13 to 30%. And according to IMF, the contraction to the global GDP would be somewhere between 3 to 4%, and that translates to about $4 to $5 trillion in 2020 alone. Massive numbers. Let's move on and look at the key implications. Let's dissect this across different industries, right? So, the first one is the tourism, travel, and hospitality, biggest first casualty of the pandemic, right? Big brands like Hilton and Marriott have actually let go of their employees, and certain employees have been asked to go on furloughs. Norwegian Air has asked almost 90% of its employees to basically go on furlough or have been let off. Huge numbers. IATA alone forecasts that the airline industry would be hit by at least $4 billion in terms of revenues and would require a support of at least $200 billion in 2020 alone. So we can see that there's a massive impact due to the fixed cost of operations, especially in this industry. If you look at Boeing, for example, it burns about $4 billion of cash every month. And with a liquidity at hand of about $15 billion, throw in $1 billion of credit line, it would survive or stay afloat for probably 3 to 4 months. What happens after that? Those are the questions that are really bothering enterprises today, especially in these sectors. And the moment of truth really was when Warren Buffett dumped every stock that he had across the American airline firms on the 2nd of May this month. Again, very revealing. And really talks about the future or the immediate future that is evolving in front of us. Secondly, the other major impact that has happened is around the supply chains across the globe, complete disruption. The effects of, for example, if you look at just a cup of coffee, requires about 29 firms across 18 countries to collaborate. That is the kind of supply chain that we are talking about. Look at auto manufacturing as well. Again, massive disruption. There has been a knock-on effect because of the retail contraction in the airline industry as well on the freight charges, for example. The freight charges, air freight charges, which were around $2 to $3 per kilo, have actually been jacked up to close to $9 to $11, which is a hike of about 4 to 5 times the cost. Again, very cascading effect because of the contraction in the retail side as well. Similarly, many other industries have been impacted as well from a supply chain perspective. If we move on to the electronics, retail, and the auto manufacturing industry as well, there has been a massive effect. We look at brands like J. Crew and Neiman Marcus in the US, they've already filed for bankruptcy. Primark, another Irish retailer, has shut down more than 700 of its shops and is foregoing almost $800 million in revenue every month. Again, huge numbers, right? Similarly, on the electronic sides, we know that Samsung has shut down many of its operating plants, especially the TV manufacturing plant in Slovakia. Foxconn has reported dips in revenues. iPhone 9 has been delayed. Launch has been delayed. On the auto side, again, the impact of just-in-time manufacturing and limited spare parts supply has led to OEMs to really shut down their production lines. Volkswagen, for example, burns around $2 billion every week, even though their production lines are shut down. Again, due to the fixed cost impact, right? And in this particular industries, there is not more than about 4 to 10 weeks of cash on an average, right? So what happens after then? Again, there'll be a lot of support that would be required. A lot of financial analytics, a lot of visibility into the working capital and other financial metrics is very, very essential. Again, similarly from a supply chain perspective, a visibility of your tier 2, tier 3 suppliers and a complete control of your inventory would be very, very essential. Moving on, talking about us, people, massive impact again, right? Working from home. We are still getting to get a hang of how to really work effectively from home, making sure that our responsibilities as a parent and as an employee are managed very, the delicate balance between the two is achieved. We are also looking at a restricted actual access to the essential services. This is another large social experiment which is evolving across the globe. Essential services, again, The metadata of it is not very clear. For example, bookshops in Belgium are open because they're considered essential, but not in the UK, for example. Laundrettes are essential, but not hairdressers. Alcohol shops, again, closed in the US and India, for example, but wine cellars in France are open because they are essential. So again, very, very interesting phenomena that is occurring across the globe. On the other side, we are also seeing that there's a spike, a spurt in the call volumes that we look at the contact centers which are being operated by service providers, grocery chains, and even the healthcare providers, right? So how do we tackle this surge that is happening? Again, application of cognitive technology and analytics is coming into play here. Finally, budgets are being frozen. New initiatives are put on the back burner, and the reality of lockdowns and movement control orders is really coming and turning our lives upside down. So we need to make sure that we are actually in control, and what would be the imperatives that would help us during such a period. So let's look at the key imperatives. Obviously, there's no pandemic relief guide that is available. So all we can do is deploy new strategies, test them, and also learn vicariously from other people's experiences, right? And the industry has been very innovative. They've been tweaking production lines to alter production and get into newer products. Dyson, which is a household appliances manufacturing firm, has started producing ventilators, for instance. Ford, GE, and 3M have partnered to start producing ventilators as well. In the US, GM has partnered with Ventec Systems to start producing FDA-approved ventilators from this month onwards. From a retail side, Zara and LVMH have started producing hand sanitizer and protective personal equipment gear as well. Similarly, other companies have also innovated to get into these kinds of diversified products. On the other hand, we know that there will be a lot of weaker companies that would require support, which is why they're looking towards the government. Governments like from the US, for example, has announced a $2 trillion package. EU similarly has announced something like an $800 billion package. Similarly, Singapore, Malaysia have also announced such relief packages as well. And this is very essential to support these smaller other firms that are in the market. Also, at the same time, there is a ballooning of corporate debt that is happening. I think some estimates put the American banks on the hook for about $800 billion now. At the same time, as we see demand falling in certain sectors, there is a relative increase of demand in certain other sectors as well. For example, grocery chains, healthcare providers, etc., so on and so forth. So there is a need to actually reskill and reorganize this labor and employees in different sectors. For example, SIA cabin crew have been redeployed as social distancing ambassadors. Hilton in the US has actually furloughed a lot of employees and are helping them getting jobs at Amazon and Kroger, right, which is a grocery chain in the US. And Kroger has hired about 30,000 employees in just 2 weeks. Similarly, a lot of employees are also deployed across the retail chains owned by Dairy Farm in Singapore. So those kinds of reorganizing and reskilling needs to happen, and that is a very important imperative that's coming to the fore. Again, on the supply chain part, there is an important need. There is a very critical need to understand the demand that is going to happen. There's a need to forecast it properly, and also look at securing alternate supply chain and have a razor sharp focus on cash at hand and dealing with the working capital management needs going forward, right? On the home front, again, I think there is a need to have a robust home infrastructure for employees to operate effectively and being efficient while at home, to ensure that they are enabled with the right sets of tools while they are working from home, and also a need to move to a culture which is more transparent and also underpinned by trust. Very, very essential. We also talked about the spike of demand in the customer call center. So there's a need to actually deploy cognitive and AI technologies to move towards a cognitive infused care in the future. We talked about budgets being frozen. So the focus, the need of the hour is to actually basically come up with initiatives that can save a lot of monies for the companies, and then that could be redeployed into different new initiatives across the organization. Finally, I think we are also looking at deploying solutions at the employee workplace to ensure that the employees are safe and can return much faster back to work. With that, I think what IBM is doing is trying to tackle all these imperatives, and with our COVID-19 offerings, if we look at the next slide, And the focus of today's discussion, as we know, is the analytics as a service. And when I say analytics as a service, I'm calling it very loosely. I'm alluding to analytics as a combination of all the cognitive use cases that would be required and that are actually emerging today. And I'm also looking at deployment of exponential technologies like IoT and Edge to your different use cases that can be then solutioned by us for you. And that is what I'm referring to as analytics as a service. So let's look at the details of the offering itself in our next slide. So this offering is basically meant for all our clients who are looking towards deployment of these new use cases in their workplaces, right? Or in their organizations. So if you want to really look into, deep dive into the demand, if you want to deep dive in the sales aspect, looking beyond the top categories of sales, looking beyond, looking into financial analytics, for example, and also looking at supply chain, how to secure that, looking at, different aspects of the value chain. And also, if you have a dearth of, AI skills within your organizations, I think this is the use case that you would be looking towards. And we would come in with our team, which would be equipped with assets, methodologies, toolkit, and an experience from an industry perspective to help you assess your situation, come up with the right recommendations within days, and then look at a solution that can be implemented to address all these use cases that are coming to the fore and that your organization would be grappling with. USP over here is basically, I'm talking days for the initial assessment and weeks for actually implementing the solution end to end, not months. So moving on to the next slide, we can really help you at any step of the cognitive journey, right? So to quote our chairman, Ginny Rometty, there is no AI without IA, which is nothing but information architecture, right? So most of the sophisticated AI outcomes that any organization has achieved is only through channeling the right set of data with rigorous training that has happened and then achieving these kinds of outcomes after we add in also the human element to drive the magic, right? So you could be just at the start of the journey doing descriptive analytics, looking at just, setting in the data sources and doing some kind of analysis on top of that. Or you could be at the other end of the spectrum where you're running rigorous predictive routines that are, coming up with recommendations and you're looking towards leapfrogging into deep learning and automation. We can help you at every stage of this journey, right? To take a leaf from IBM's own journey, I think we have Diane Gerson, who is our global HR SVP, has actually used analytics and AI extensively to transform IBM's internal performance management as well. Today, managers get alerts of employees who are at the risk of fleeing, right? So, and they are also using AI extensively to groom resumes and also keep a tab on rivals' talent. Really amazing kind of use cases that have been, implemented. But at the same time, it's very essential to understand, like I mentioned, that these sophisticated AI algorithms or use cases cannot be possible unless we have the right set of data and it's being channeled properly with the right information architecture that is, powering these kinds of use cases. And finally, they are trained with the right set of people, and there is a inherent bias of data that has been taken care of, right? So there are interesting examples around that as well. We know a few years back that Microsoft Tay, which was basically a cognitive bot that was deployed on Twitter, was taken down within a few hours after deployment. Why? Because it was infamously dubbed as the racist engine, which was spewing misogynistic remarks, praising Hitler, and also calling humans super cool. There was another case as well, right? Talking about human bias in data, which was Compass, which is nothing but the correctional offender management profile for alternate sanction, which basically assesses a score for recidivism, which is nothing but the tendency of a convicted felon to reoffend. And it's being used in 3 states in the US currently as well. But it's been surrounded with a lot of controversies around bias of the algorithm towards a particular race. It's a very sophisticated algorithm and it uses race as one of the parameters along with 136 other parameters as well, with an accuracy of about 65%. But having said that, it points towards the fact that probably the data is not complete, or there is a need to actually remove the bias in the algorithm because of the human component. So to summarize, I think it is very, very essential to ensure that you engage an external agency or a company to make sure that your data is complete, the training models are rigorously trained, and there is an external or an outside-in view of the preconceived notions or some sort of theories that might be existing in the organization. That needs to be challenged, and then outside in view would definitely help. With that, let's move on to the next slide where we talk about our capabilities. So we bring in a differentiated capability set to the fore, and we are completely technology agnostic. We will be bringing our talent, the team with the skill sets, assets, and methodologies that could be deployed across multiple technologies, right? Any technology that you might have, Teradata, Hadoop, Cloudera, Netezza, or even on the IBM stack, any sort of use cases that you might be wanting to work on across any cloud. So we are completely technology agnostic, and we will bring accelerators that would really help us, hit the ground running. Tools like the data lake assessment tool that we have got the worker insights technician of the future. We also have an ecosystem orchestrator that would really help the team to actually cut down a lot of the time during the implementation of these use cases that you're looking at. So with that, let's move on to the next segment wherein we'll talk about our experiences and certain use cases. And moving on to the next slide, the first one is basically a leading broadband and pay TV provider, which was experiencing surge in call volumes and also customer care spikes. So the IBM team went in and actually analyzed the whole call center data, looked at different categories, also looked at the different queries that were coming in, and also did directional interviews with the staff to come up with a recommendation, which was a two-prong approach. In step one, basically, we wanted to unshackle the agent efficiency by use of asynchronous messaging. And step two was basically to translate all the low-value tasks to a cognitive virtual agent. Moving on to the next slide, if you look at the service mix, the agents were handling live calls and also doing live chat with different customers. And the idea was to basically flatten the curve and ensure that most of these new calls or a segment of the calls could be diverted to the asynchronous messaging channel. And this was an option that was given to the customers who were hitting the call center to choose between waiting in the queue for about a few minutes or actually directly conversing with an agent through the SMS or the WhatsApp channel. That was number one. Number two was basically to translate all the easier queries or the low value tasks to a cognitive virtual agent. And by doing this, I think they had great results. They saw about 10 percentage point shoot up in the customer satisfaction. There was about 5 percentage point improvement in the employee satisfaction, and about 30% of the voice calls were moved to the asynchronous channel. And all in all this was done just in 12 weeks flat. Amazing results, I would say. Moving on to the next scenario, we would like to showcase this in terms of a demonstration. So let's get into the demonstration. So in this demo, we will be looking at Jane, who is the insurance customer, and the company is Z Insurance Company. And we'll be looking at two different scenarios in this demonstration. The first one is where Jane is basically trying to understand the status of a claim. And the second scenario is when she goes onto the website and is looking for a new product, the renter's insurance. So Jane is calling the call center and is placed on queue. The wait time is about 17 minutes. Alternately, at this point in time, she gets the option to either get onto the asynchronous messaging channel, wherein she can get to talk to the agent through SMS. She chooses to go with the option of SMS. Gets a message, and the agent would like to validate the context first. He validates the account number and asks about the claim with Jane. He also confirms that the claim was made by Mr. Jared Wilson on the 1st of October. And also that the status has been approved and an email was sent out to her account. But she tells him that she never got it. So he confirms the email account and resends it again. That's scenario one. In the second scenario, she goes onto the website wherein She tries to use the cognitive virtual agent to understand a new product, renters insurance. The cognitive agent has a context of the previous conversation and gives more details and also understands what's her current address. And if that is a property to which she wants to buy the renter's insurance for. And now at this point in time, he also informs, the virtual agent informs Jason, who is a live agent, to take over the transaction because this will be more complex in nature. And Jason, who's basically a personal liability insurance agent, gets in touch with Jane directly. He informs Jane that because she's got other personal liability insurance with Z Insurance Company, she would get a benefit of about $20 by taking this additional insurance. She agrees and Jason checks with her on the payment option, whether she'd like to make the payment in full directly or in as EMIs. And while he does that, there are also other conversations that Jason is involved in. So Jane responds by saying that she'd like to prefer the EMI option, but she'd like to give the details later on. So that's the end of the use case here. And let's move on to the next slide. So this is an example of a telco wherein we went in and did a deep dive into their telco data on the postpaid and the prepaid side. We also looked into the prepaid international plans to identify which are the low margin plans for them. And we also looked at the different segments to identify the bottom feeders with negative or low gross margins. Additionally, we also looked at their different retail outlets to understand from a cost perspective what will be the sales enablement activities that will need to be done. And finally, looked at the overall market customer segments vis-a-vis the competition to come up with a micro segment wise action plan. Moving on to the next slide. This was another example wherein we interacted and worked for a footwear retailer in ASEAN, wherein we looked at the different retail outlets and analyzed the sales. We also looked at the product segments to understand the top categories. We also looked at the customer segments to understand the effectiveness of their retention and other initiatives, associated initiatives. And finally, we'd also deployed an AI model to do demand forecasting. Finally, moving on to the next slide, we've also developed these different offerings from an AI and IoT perspective, which is basically to ensure that we can actually help getting the employees back to work much faster. So very relevant use cases which include social distance scoring, employee health monitoring, there is crowd monitoring, there is also occupancy monitoring, and so on and so forth. So these are all very relevant use cases that can be deployed, and we've got solutions that have been already built around these areas, and we are ready to implement them for you. This brings me to the next slide, which is my final slide of this webinar, and I think I'd like to wrap up by saying that we are already ready to get into a conversation with you. We've got the contract templates in place, we've got a set of deliverables, pre-processed SOWs, and we can also have the solutions and accelerators right up to your door as soon as you request. Now, coming to the close, I'd like to leave you with just 3 messages, right? The first one being the fact that we can really help you with all these new use cases that are coming to light in light of the pandemic, and we are really there to help you out with all these new scenarios that are coming to light. That's number 1. Number 2, we will actually come with a team which comes pre-equipped with the tools, methodologies, assets, and the toolkit and accelerators to ensure that we can work with you immediately. It could be any technology platform that you might have. You might have requirements around consulting, or you would want to probably do a consulting first and then go for an implementation of those ideas that have been found out very quickly. Number 3 is basically the fact that we would work on your brief and with your teams to ensure that all this is done in a very fast manner. And we are talking about weeks. For example, the client that we talked about earlier, we deployed the whole solution within just 12 weeks. So with the accelerators that we bring to the fore, we can actually do this solution in a matter of days and weeks, not months or years. So I think that's the third point that I'd like to leave you with. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Alan for the questions and answers and wrap up. Thank you very much.